among the four marginal revolutions, special economic zones were the most controversial. They were established to co-opt capitalism to save socialism. The idea was to allow them to experiment with the market economy, importing advanced technology, managerial know-how, selling goods to the global markets, creating jobs and stimulating the local economy. But all the experiments were confined to a few enclaves and rigorously controlled so that they would not undermine socialism elsewhere. And if they failed, the damage to socialism would be negligible. So the presence of the two reforms was a defining feature of China's transition. The failure to separate that two sources of reform is a main source of confusion in the literature. The Chinese government has understandably promulgated a state-centered account of reform, projecting itself as the omniscient designer and instigator of reform. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party has survived market reform, today still monopolizes political power, and remains active in the economy, certainly has helped to sell the state-centered account of reform. But it was the marginal revolutions that brought entrepreneurship and the market forces back to China when the government was busy saving the state sector and the socialism. The second part of our tale began in 1992 after Deng Xiaoping's southern tour, where marginal revolutions brought market forces back to China in the previous decade. Regional competition became the transformative force in the Chinese economy in the second decade, turning China into a market economy by the end of the 20th century. Regional competition was not new. It existed in the first decade, but at that time, it created a lot of trade barriers at the provincial borders and fragmented the Chinese economy. China implemented in 92 price reform, and then tax reform in 94, and then started to privatize state-owned enterprises in the mid-90s. Those reform measures paved the way for the rise of a common national market, which was able to discipline all economic actors in the economy. That allowed regional competition to become a transformative force in the economy. So here our account differs from the one presented by Huang Yasen in his book, 2008 book, Capitalism with Chinese Characteristics. There he made a controversial argument that China was more capitalistic and entrepreneurial in the 1980s than in the 1990s. If the argument means that private entrepreneurship prevailed against the state in the 80s, it's in full accord with our account of marginal revolutions. But if it means that the Chinese economy was moving away from a free market economy in the 90s, I think it misses a fundamental change in the Chinese economy in the 1990s, which is the emergence of a common national market, which was a precondition for regional competition to work. But identified with repetitive investment, regional competition is often faulted for distorting comparative advantage and hindering economies of scale in the Chinese literature. A more nuanced picture emerged in our account. What regional competition did was to translate China's advantage in space as a continental country into high speed of industrialization. How did that happen can be best seen from the hierarchian perspective, which stresses the growth of knowledge as the ultimate force driving economic change. In Mao's time, education was under attack, and knowledge itself became a political liability. China was isolated from the West, and also China cut itself off from its own cultural roots. Mao's radical ideology impoverished the Chinese economy, and even worse, closed the Chinese minds. After Mao died, China re-embraced pragmatism. Seeking truth from facts became the party's new guideline, and getting rich became glorious. Then the most restrictive constraint for economic development is the lack of knowledge. This included technical knowledge, knowledge about the institutions, and the local knowledge. The solution to this problem was found in regional competition. When China's 32 provinces, 280 plus municipalities, 2,800 counties, 19,000 plus towns, and 15,000 plus villages threw themselves into open competition for investment and for good ideas of developing the local economy, China became a gigantic laboratory where many different economic experiments were tried at the same time. Knowledge of all kinds was created, discovered, and diffused fast. So through the growth of knowledge, the enormous scale of Chinese industrialization made its rapid speed possible. Given our account of how China became capitalist, what can we say about capitalism that just emerged in China? A persistent feature of the Chinese market transformation is the lack of political liberalization. This is not to say that the Chinese political system has stood still over the past 35 years. The party has certainly distanced itself from radical ideology. It's no longer communist, except in name. And in recent years, the internet has empowered the Chinese people to exercise their political voice. Nonetheless, China remains ruled by a single political party. This continuity hides a fundamental change in the Chinese political reality. With the death of Deng Xiaoping, politics, what we call strongman politics, was brought to a closure. Under Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and later Xi Jinping, China is no longer ruled by a single charismatic leader. So in that sense, Chinese politics is qualitatively different from the time of Mao and Deng. But Chinese government has not come to terms with this political change. And there have been little efforts of institution building to prepare China for this changed political reality. But the combination of rapid economic development and seemingly unchanged politics has led many to characterize Chinese market economy as state-led authoritarian capitalism. And so people ask the questions, when and how China going to embrace democracy, and whether the party going to survive democratization. In the book, a different perspective is offered. It provides a different diagnosis of the flaw of Chinese market economy as is practiced today. That is, China has developed a robust market for goods, but still lacks a market for ideas. The market for ideas points to a different way of thinking about China's political future. Our reasoning is mainly based on the following two considerations. First, multi-party competition does not work unless is cultivated and disciplined by a free market for ideas, without which democracy can be easily hijacked by interest groups and undermined by the tyranny of the majority. The performance of democracy critically depends on the market for ideas, just like privatization depends on the market for capital assets. Second, multi-party competition had virtually no precedent in Chinese history. Indeed, the Chinese word party, 党 itself, has a very strong negative connotation in traditional Chinese thinking. Forming a party and pursue its self-interests in Chinese 结党营私 has long been criticized against the political ideal, which is what is under heaven is for all, as 天下为公. So, but in contrast, the market for ideas has a deep and revered root in traditional Chinese thinking. Ever since the time of Confucius, that 100 school of thought content has become a political ideal. So in our view, the market for ideas promises a more gradual but more viable approach to rebuilding Chinese politics and the principles of tolerance, justice, and humanity. Over the past 35 years, China has embraced capitalism not just in the economy. The theory of moral sentiments today has more than a dozen Chinese translations. And the book has won the mind and heart of Premier Wen Jiabao. The message of Adam Smith resonates strongly with the Chinese, not least because the striking affinity with the traditional Chinese thinking on economy and society. A surprising outcome of China's transition to capitalism is that China found its way back to its cultural roots. Seeking truth from facts is a traditional Chinese thinking, which Deng Xiaoping mistakenly called the essence of Marxism. But many facts today remain hidden, covered in China, because China doesn't have a free market for ideas. But we are cautiously optimistic that China may well embrace the market for ideas in the decades to come, just like the way it embraced the market for goods. As our modern economy becomes more and more knowledge-driven, the gains from free exchange of ideas is simply too great, and the cost of suppressing it are too high. So China's embracement of both its history and globalization leads us to believe that Chinese capitalism is going to be different. This is desirable not just for China, but for the West and everyone else. And it's certainly desirable for the global market economy. Today, biodiversity is recognized as vital for sustaining our natural environments. Institutional diversity plays a similar role in keeping our human society resilient. Capitalism will be much more robust if it's not a monopoly of the West, but flourishes in societies with different cultures, different religions, different histories, and different political systems. Trade in the global market for goods makes war too expensive to fight. A global market for ideas can accommodate and thrive on the clash of ideas, but steers us away from the clash of civilizations.